Okay, so reasons why people don't believe in science. I'm going to talk about a couple of them because they come up in my research. So, data. So, gathering data it would be super difficult. Well, it is difficult for most things except for like climate change because I looked that up once and NASA is all about that. But if you don't look it up, of course, it's kind of out of your way, so you end up not doing that. The second one is socially uncomfortable. This is one that I feel like comes up a lot, especially in my area, with it being more of a rural community. So, with it being more of a rural community, it makes it also socially uncomfortable to have a positive view on or negative view, thinking that climate change is something that actually is a thing. Where most people here don't think it's a thing, and the main reason why is because they look for data that supports themselves, or they don't look for data at all because they feel like they're educated when in fact they're just educated, and it's like an echoing chamber of people saying that it isn't a thing. So, talking about a couple like the interesting parts of my research, I didn't interview anybody that were flat earthers, but for flat earthers, for that specific one, the main thing that contributes to it is people using the echoing chamber, obviously. People looking for data that only supports them and only them, and going out of their way to ignore data that goes against it. So, opposites attract. This was a super interesting one just because it was worded really, it was like a blanket statement of opposites always attract. So, I got a bunch of different answers from this, but the main answer that I got, or the most like well formulated answer I got from that, was that it was true and false to a point where it's like a diagram where people have to be similar to each other enough to be comfortable, but they have to be far enough apart so that it is like you have stuff to talk about and conversation, and that's mostly what I got. For opposites attract, I also interviewed my math teacher, and I enjoyed lots of her answers. One of them was for the opposites attract. So she said that it was false because in math, if it's not always right, then it's wrong. So, climate change. This was one that I mentioned earlier that was a bigger part of this whole thing. And I got mostly positives. I interviewed 5 people and I got 3 positives and 2 negatives. The interesting thing about that, though, is that from both of the people that said that climate change is not affected by people, they both had similar views on all the other things. Like, they didn't think that the earth was flat. They thought that opposites attracted to a point. They also thought that they didn't believe that vaccines were a thing, or they believed that vaccines were a thing, and they also believed that uh, we use 100% of our brain just at different times, depending on the time, and stuff like that. But for climate change, both of their opinions were different. So it's probably because it's a different thing compared to flat Earth, as well as anti-vaccines, where they're actually looking for opposing information, whereas people that are looking for climate change, that climate change isn't a thing, is more of a like I said, more of a social acceptance thing, and it's a social uncomfortable thing, especially here. But for my math teacher, the reason she said that climate change was false because the impact was like the human impact is negligible. This was data that she got 10 years ago. She actually was she was going to major in all like the atmosphere and stuff like that. But this was a college in Utah. I don't remember the college off the top of my head, but she said that her professors had them go through this entire math sequence, and it showed that uh, we were, like climate change wise, we were in the same spot that we should be within a margin of error. Whereas for the other person who wasn't a math teacher, he was an engineer, but he said that it was part of the whole cycle of climate change. And this comes down to, also a lot of it comes down to with him, was the scientific community having they're very similar words, climate change and global warming. And global warming being a hot button thing, they attribute it to climate change itself, where it's similar, they're like tied to each other, but global warming is the increasing of climate change itself. But people that are against people having affected climate change itself feel that or look for data proving that climate change itself has been happening since the beginning of time, so it's happening right now, and that's what it is. So as for the scientific principle and theory, this has made me a lot more cognizant of how my biases and stuff make me block out other people's opinions and such like that. As well as with my math teacher, when she talked about climate change, she explained it in such a way that it made me question myself, and then I looked it up. Like I said, it might have been the earlier video, but I looked up at NASA, and I looked up climate change, and NASA popped up right off the bat. So it wasn't super hard to find any information supporting the fact that people are ruining the climate. But there you go.